Great, I think we are going to kick off. So I'll just leave the slide here on the front again, just for 1 or 2 more minutes. We are going to be looking at some of our rhetoric resources that we use in our rhetoric unit a little bit later. So if you scan this QR code, you should be able to access that. If not, do let me know in the chat and I'll bring it up on screen again a little bit later. So thank you to everybody who has said hello in the chat. Lovely to have you. So 3.5 weeks left of term. Some of you might be breaking up a little earlier than others, but you've made it. We're nearly there at the end of term, and thank you for spending this hour, taking your time out of a busy school year for this webinar. Hopefully you've joined our other webinars as well. Today we are going to be talking about our approach at English Mastery to the rhetoric, how to teach rhetoric. And we'll talk about AFOREST a little bit later. So I have on call with me, he's not, you can't see him at the moment, but my colleague Callum is in the background. If you do have any questions during the webinar, we do have a Q&A box. You can put some questions in there, but you can also put some questions in the chat feed as well, if at any point you have any questions. Okay, so let's kick off. So this is our agenda today. We're just going to start thinking about, first of all, why is rhetoric such an important unit? What are the potential challenges of teaching rhetoric? Perhaps you already have a current rhetoric unit that you teach in your curriculum. So what are the common challenges that lots of our schools face? And then I'm going to share with you the English Mastery approach to rhetoric. And then if you'd like to stay on towards the end of this webinar, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the English Mastery EEF trial as well. We still have some space for people who want to join the research trial. So if you are interested, or if any of the resources that I go through today do interest you, please feel free to stay towards the end of the webinar, so the last 5 minutes of the webinar. Okay. So before I even have a nice, lovely discussion with you about rhetoric, I just wanted to introduce who we are, because some of you might not know who English Mastery are and how we're linked with ARC. So I just thought I'd just do a little quick introduction in terms of who English Mastery are and how we're part of ARC Curriculum Plus. So English Mastery started in 2015 as a pilot study in art schools, and in 2018 our programme went national in 57 schools. So ARC is one of the biggest multi-academy trusts in the country, and it started in 7 ARC schools, and then in 2018 we managed to launch our programme nationally. Now, we are the only mastery programme in English with hard evidence that our programme works. So in 2018, an impact report was run by the Brilliant Club, and in that report, an independent evaluation, a total of 1,700 pupils were involved in this evaluation, and their findings were that English Mastery had a significant positive effect on pupils' English scores, regardless of their prior attainment and demographic. And the effect of our intervention was basically equivalent to 4 months additional progress. And then in 2019, the Education Endowment Foundation selected our programme to run an efficacy trial. Sadly, obviously, this was disrupted by COVID, but the data gathered from the initial trial was so positive. That's why the DfE actually chose us for their accelerator fund to continue with the second trial. So if you are interested to be part of that second trial, do please, like I said, stay behind at the end of this webinar. And basically, we work closely with English teachers, not just in art, beyond the art network as well, through the EF trial, but we have lots of schools across the country. We're in sort of 15 multi-academy trusts as well. And basically, we are constantly testing the impact of our programme on students' performance in English. And we are part of the ARC Curriculum Plus family. So we also have other programmes available in Key Stage 3. So we have geography, science and maths. And then primary, we also have a maths programme, science, history and geography, and that's through Oxford Out, so Oxford University Press. So we have lots of different programmes in different subjects and also different key stages. And ultimately, this is our mission, that children and young people are at the centre of what we do. And what we really want is to empower teachers to give every young person, regardless of their background, their subject knowledge and skills that will allow them to succeed. We also want to make sure that we reduce teacher workload. And so our programme not only provides curriculum resources, but also really good quality professional development. So we are a subject improvement program, and obviously English mastery, we focus on English mastery at Key Stage. So, sorry, the teaching of English at Key Stage 3. Okay, so that's us. So we're going to now think about rhetoric. So I'm going to just launch in a second. So I've got a poll question that's going to hopefully come up on your screen. And basically the question is, do you already teach rhetoric in your curriculum? So some of you might teach it in Key Stage 3, some in Key Stage 4, might be no. So I'll just put that little poll up and see what we have today. I wonder who's going to win, Key Stage 4 or Key Stage 3. Okay, just give a couple more minutes. So in the lead so far is Key Stage 3. We'll see if there's any more in Key Stage 4. Just 3 more people to answer. Okay, I think I'm going to end it there. Ooh, 2 more people. See if we can get everyone to answer the question. Get top participation. Okay, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for answering. So it looks like Key Stage 3 is actually in the lead. So the majority of you in this webinar actually teach the unit at Key Stage 3, which is amazing. And those of you don't, 40% of you teach it in Key Stage 4. So I'm just going to quickly share the results there. Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking part. Okay, so some of you already teach rhetoric, which is absolutely fantastic. But I want us to think about why is it so important to study rhetoric? So many of you are already teaching it in your curriculum at Key Stage 3. Why do we think it's so important to study rhetoric in Key Stage 3? I'm going to use a chat function for this. So I'd just like you to reflect on your own. You might have a colleague sitting next to you. And if you could share your thoughts in the chat feed, that would be great. So first of all, why do we think it's so crucial to study rhetoric at Key Stage 3? And then secondly, how do we think it's going to affect a student's cultural and academic literacy? Why is it important that we include this at Key Stage 3 and how does it affect those things? So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes just to reflect individually. And then we can put that in the chat feed. And thank you to Gemma, who's starting us off. Build foundations for Key Stage 4. Brilliant. Just give a couple more minutes for everyone else to add their ideas. Some really great answers here. So yes, I mean, obviously some of you are already thinking about its great foundations for Key Stage 4. That's actually, it's really important that we teach them the foundations at Key Stage 3, because sometimes by the time they get to GCSE, it's far too late. You know, if you think about GCSE, they have their speaking and listening assessment. Sometimes, actually, if we really think about it, have we prepared students for that point when they have to stand up in front of the class, you know, for their GCSE and prepare and perform a speech? So that's really important. I really like. I saw an answer here about, it's Jamie Lee. Yes, linking to the history of language, Aristotle, conventions of tragedy. Brilliant. And I think somebody also put down, let me just see, it was Charlotte. Thank you, Charlotte. Yes, absolutely. To be able to persuade effectively, but also know when they're being persuaded and manipulated by the media. So important. You know, they're bombarded, students are bombarded by so many messages via the media, and they need to be able to have an understanding of, you know, how is that affecting me? How is language used? for persuasion, but also how can I use that later on in life? So real world skills as well. So some brilliant answers there. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we really agree with some of those opinions. You know, the reason why we think it's really important is that we think that students will, you know, by learning rhetoric explicitly, it will develop their cultural literacy by gaining knowledge of how communication has been used throughout history, as well as understanding how language and rhetoric shapes cultural values, beliefs and attitudes. It also enhances academic literacy by improving writing and speaking. It gives students the ability or the toolkit to know how to analyze and evaluate the arguments of others, whether that's through their own arguments or, you know, students in their class, but also in the real world when they leave school. And that's really important because, you know, that by have a real understanding of language, it allows them to be engaged perhaps in more informed and effective communication, and also be involved in communication in both academic and professional contexts. And obviously learning how language is important in terms of how it's shaped cultures, our beliefs, attitudes, you know, really famous speakers in history, politicians, how does their use of language really affect their reader and their audience? And ultimately, this is the main aim. We really want our students to be able to articulate and present their ideas and be really confident. I have a colleague who is an amazing English teacher who's very confident now, but actually, you know, when she reflects back on her time at school, she said that actually that was the one thing that was holding her back. She never felt confident enough to articulate herself properly. She only found that out, you know, that toolkit later on in life. And I think it's really, really important that we teach that from a really young age, and that's why we solidify it at Key Stage 3. Now, if you know about English Mastery, we have many units. We have a literature strand, we have a writing explicit grammar strand, but for all of our units of work, we constantly take feedback. Now, in all of our units, we have implicit opportunities for talk within the curriculum. But based on customer feedback, based on teachers' feedback, we also wanted to make sure that we developed a unit that was explicitly planned for spoken language knowledge outcomes. And so this is just some of the feedback that some of our teachers gave us, but actually that perhaps at Year 8 especially, or Key Stage 3, there's perhaps a lack of opportunities for non-fiction. It tends to be, you know, if we look at lots of different curriculums, often it's focused on creative writing, descriptive writing, or focusing on literature text rather than non-fiction. And yeah, perhaps there is a sense, you know, because you're trying to cram so much content in, preparing them for Key Stage 4, possibly, you know, the creative tasks and speaking and listening and drama, etc., kind of falls to the wayside, and that's something we definitely want to change. And we also just really want to make sure that explicit opportunities for spoken language and structured and creative talk is available in our curriculum. Now, we also know, if you've read the recent Ofsted research review, it does tell us in there that actually a really good English curriculum should provide frequent opportunities for pupils to practice, refine, apply their spoken language knowledge, and also to take part in exploratory talk. And that should be in all units of work in the curriculum. But to have an explicit unit where that can be really refined and practiced is really important. And that's why we created our own rhetoric unit at English Mastery. So we know why rhetoric is so important, and we've got so many, you know, similar answers in the chat. But it's a challenge. It's a real challenge to create and build a strong rhetoric unit, but also there's challenges in terms of what's the right way to teach it. And so I just wanted to share with you, first of all, what are the common challenges, and hopefully you'll be able to connect with some of the challenges, and then I'll talk about how our new unit tries to address some of these challenges. So, I'd like you, before we look at the challenges, I'd like you to think about topics that your students particularly enjoy talking about in their speeches. Now, if you've just done some speaking and listening assessments for year 10 and year 11, there's always that one student, isn't there, that wants to talk about making cannabis legal, or, you know, something controversial. But it'd be really great to hear, you know, what are the common topics that your students really enjoy talking about. You know, in the society that we live in at the moment, there's lots and lots of different topics, but that'd be great if you could put them down. But also, what do your students particularly struggle with? So what topics do they enjoy, and what are the things that your students actually struggle with? And perhaps it might be sharing your experience with previous speaking and listening units that you've taught. And I'll give everyone just a minute just to share their topics, but also struggles. Shadia, yes, thank you. That's they're very common topics, aren't they? Anything related to school, uniform, facilities, toilet access, absolutely. School policies, yes, definitely. Mental health, definitely a really important topic. Thank you so much for sharing topics there. So I'd like to hear some of your, if you haven't already done so, what do your students struggle with? So we've got quite a lot of topics that people have shared. So lots about gender, social media, mental health, absolutely. Trans rights, yes. But what do your students struggle with? So somebody's put down they struggle with political concepts. But just think about what do your students struggle with when you give them the task, right, go away and structure your speech. What do you think they struggle with? So thank you to Claire, who's put down that students actually tend to struggle with how to structure their speech. Yes, so they can identify it in other speeches, but when it comes to creating their own ideas and having to do it themselves, that's a real struggle. Thank you so much. Louise has shared having a range of viewpoints. Yes, sometimes they'll have one small viewpoint and then they can't sort of expand after that. Yes, Lynn, thank you so much. That is a real problem, isn't it? Confidence. I remember being in the classroom and trying to record everyone for that speaking and listening, that often we had lots of students who said, can I do this on my own instead of in front of the class? And thank you to, I think it's Claire. Yes, not enough knowledge. That's really important, isn't it? If they don't have knowledge of a particular topic, it's really difficult for them to actually plan anything. Amazing, thank you so much. Yes, and lastly, we've got down worried they'll run out of time. Yeah, so actually thinking about how to fit everything in the time, but also the actual performance element, that the public speaking and the confidence in making sure that they're able to perform that in a really effective way. Thank you so much for being so lively and being involved in the chat. So I'm going to quickly talk through some of the common challenges. So before we created this unit, we went to lots of different schools, we spoke to lots of different teachers, heads of department, and we really wanted to find out, first of all, what are the challenges of rhetoric? Because we didn't just want to create just another speaking and listening unit. We really wanted to make sure that our unit really addressed some of the common challenges. So somebody mentioned this in the chat, and that's the fact that actually, a lot of the time, we find that students just don't have very much to say, or they don't know very much about a topic. And it may be that you've been in a situation where perhaps, you know, you've booked the IT room and you've printed off lots and lots of different articles on a particular topic, and you've read those articles together, you've had a really great discussion, and then you booked the IT room and you said, right, now off you go and research a little bit more about that topic. And actually what they end up doing is they end up copying and pasting off Google into a Word document, but actually they're not really understanding or have a really in-depth knowledge of the topic themselves. It might just be they've copied and pasted some notes, and that's it, and they're kind of maybe just regurgitating some facts or opinions that they've researched, and often that means that their speech or bit of work lacks a lot of depth because they just don't have any knowledge in that particular topic. And sometimes you'll find yourself spending even more time actually trying to, you know, teach the context or the background of that topic before they can even get to that point of actually using that information to create something of their own. So there's limited knowledge, which is definitely a challenge, and we have to think about how do we meet that challenge. And again, somebody mentioned this earlier, actually just the structure. Some students often really don't know how to organize their thoughts or arrange their arguments in a logical and powerful way. And what you'll often find is perhaps they'll just write down, like I said, copy down lots and lots of different facts or opinions, and maybe just try and scatter them throughout their speech, but actually not thinking about why they've put a particular idea at the beginning or why they want to put it at the end and what the impact of that is going to be. And so there's a lot to learn and for them to understand in terms of how do you organize your ideas first of all, how do you whittle them down to the most important ideas, but then how are you going to structure that effectively in a piece of writing and in a speech. And then the next one is actually stylistic choices. And you're all probably, it's the name of and that's why it's the name of the webinar, but you'll probably be very used to our stylistic list choices of AFOREST. And actually what we're going to do today is we're going to burn all of these different forests down. So I've put different examples there, but it's a Frankenstein monster. Whenever I go to any new school or any school, they have different variations of a forest, a forest, IP in a forest. And actually what ends up happening is you just have a very long list of stylistic choices, and it's almost like a checklist, and that's how students structure their speech. They'll start off with maybe a rhetorical question or an anecdote, and then some facts, or make up some facts that they found, or if they can find any. And actually what you get is just a very long list of meaningless techniques based on a mnemonics that's been shared by the teacher, as opposed to authentic, logical, and moving arguments. So today we're going to burn that forest down, any version of the forest, and we're going to look at another way of how to perhaps get students to think about stylistic choices, but in a meaningful way. And then the next challenge is actually that students just are really not confident in terms of memorizing their speech or their content, and also the delivery of it. So I can see Michaela's there in chat, she's put down confidence to deliver. Absolutely, often you'll find students often rely too heavily on their notes and read out their speech rather than actually performing a speech with techniques for impact. So how many times have we seen students either with a piece of paper in front of them or perhaps some cards as notes, but literally just reading off the page. So we need to be able to be explicit in terms of how do we combat that challenge? How do we actually allow students to know the steps in terms of to memorize first of all their content, but also knowing and building the confidence in terms of how to deliver that in a meaningful way. So these are probably common challenges that you see in your classroom. Some of you may already have some great techniques in terms of how to meet those challenges. But in terms of teaching rhetoric and making it a meaningful topic to teach, we often find that these are some of the challenges that teachers will face. So after listening to teachers' challenges and talking to them and being in classrooms, we at English Mastery have created our own rhetoric unit. It's been taught for the first time this summer term. We've got some great feedback so far. So I thought I'd just share with you some of the ways that we have put our unit together, and I'll show you some of the resources within that unit as well. So I'm just going to talk through the English Mastery approach to rhetoric. So before I show you some of our thinking and some of the resources, I just wanted to share with you, our definition or the definition that we look to in terms of defining rhetoric. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read that definition there from the Oxford Dictionary. And I think what's really important is that word exploitation, is that we really, the purpose of a really good rhetoric unit is for students to be really confident in knowing how to exploit language themselves for impact, for effect. And that's the purpose of our unit. That's what we really want students to be able to do and understand, when is it purposeful to do that? And what kind of effect can the manipulation, exploitation of language have on a given reader or audience? So I'm just going to talk through with you, first of all, what our unit looks like before we dive into some of our resources. So our unit is a spoken language unit, and it essentially focuses on three things: the form, structure, and obviously oracy. Now, we say spoken language unit because the assessment, which I'll show you in a moment, is to perform a speech. However, we know that some teachers like to use it as writing as well. It encourages students to sort of, structure, plan, draft together their speech before finally performing it. Our unit has 13 lessons, and we teach it in the summer term after Animal Farm, and I'll explain to you a little bit later why we do it after Animal Farm. But it's a really nice summer unit. It's nice at the end of the year. It's nice to also perhaps draw on some of the knowledge that they've learned throughout the year, to kind of inform them in terms of topics for this unit. And the assessment mark scheme is based on the GCSE spoken language criteria. So we actually also think is a really great unit if you're teaching at Key Stage 3 to also prepare students for that spoken language that they do at GCSE. So this is the assessment that we give them for this unit. And essentially, we ask students to write and perform a speech which challenges an injustice that you feel strongly about. And we say to them that in your speech, they can refer to other texts that they've studied as inspiration, such as Oliver Twist and Animal Farm. And also, we have a key focus on ethos, logos, and pathos. And I'll talk about those things in a bit more detail in a second. But I just wanted to share with you, essentially, what does the unit look like? And what does this assessment look like? Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the key principles behind our rhetoric unit and how we've tried to change how we teach rhetoric through this new unit. So a key principle behind our rhetoric unit is giving students the foundational and contextual knowledge of rhetoric. So the context of it being the art of public speaking and how rhetoric was taught in special schools in ancient Greece and Rome to prepare men, traditionally for political and cultural life. And we really go through, how Aristotle defines these three main components of successful rhetoric, which is ethos, pathos, and logos. And what's really important is actually they need to work together to create an effective argument. So some of you on this call may already be teaching this in your curriculum. It may be a good chance for you to reflect. If you do teach ethos, pathos, and logos, where else in your curriculum do you teach it? Because I'll talk about that, how it's linked to our other units in a second. The second principle is we teach the 5 parts of oratory. So I don't know if any of you have seen this book. If you haven't, it's a great book. Definitely put it on your reading list. So Sam Leith wrote the book You Talking to Me, and in his book he talks about having 5 steps to oratory, 5 steps to really prepare for a great speech or performance or spoken performance. And these are the 5 steps. So we teach these explicitly in our unit. So the first step is invention. And that links to the first challenge that we talked about, how students really struggle with coming up with their own ideas. They really struggle in terms of, well, what am I going to say? They can perhaps identify good things in other speeches that they hear, but when it comes to them creating their own, that's where they find it really difficult. So we go through that step of invention. How do we come up with ideas? How do we brainstorm? How do we link perhaps to prior learning? And the second step is arrangement. So once we've gone through the step of how to come up with ideas, we then go through how do you then put those ideas in a logical and powerful order. So it's great that you've got those ideas, but what are we going to do with those ideas? How do we put that in an order that's really going to mean something? And then the third step is style. So this is when we then start thinking about methods for impact. So, you know, maybe traditionally students will be given a forest or, you know, the mnemonic list, and that's what they start with in terms of style. They'll maybe try and produce content just by creating, you know, content in terms of meeting that checklist. But actually we're saying, no, that's a bit further down. Invention and coming up with ideas is more important, then structure, and then we're thinking about, okay, methods for impact. And this is where ethos, logos, and pathos comes in. What language choices do you need to make? And then the fourth step is memory. So, you know, we teach students that good speakers do not read their speeches, they memorize, we use brief notes, and we show them strategies and techniques of how to do that. And obviously that links to the final step, which is delivery. And, you know, how do you perform a speech for impact? How do you use body language? How do you use tone, pace, volume, emphasis on words, etc.? So we teach all of those different stages explicitly, and we do the planning with them through each step, and we go through that in the unit, so that eventually by the end they'll be really confident in terms of delivering their speech. And lastly, what we think really strengthens is our unit is our knowledge-rich approach to rhetoric. So as we identified earlier, you know, students perhaps use a forest or some other mnemonic because they lack knowledge and substance. And what we really want for our students is actually have a really solid foundational knowledge. So we actually link our rhetoric unit with prior knowledge in the curriculum. So I mentioned earlier that we teach rhetoric straight after Animal Farm. And the reason why we teach it straight after Animal Farm is because in Animal Farm, they do look at ethos, pathos, and logos. They do look at the injustice of how the pigs treat the other animals on the farm. But we also link it to their other knowledge. You know, how about Oliver Twist? How are the orphans treated? How are the poor treated? Why is that injustice? How about women in the Victorian era? So by the time they come to that rhetoric unit, they're not just drawing on, you know, scrambled facts that they're trying to research on the internet. We can actually draw on the knowledge that they've already learned in terms of previous curriculum, what they learned in year 7, what they learned at the beginning of year 8, how does it all come together? And that's what we think really strengthens the unit, is that we're not just using extracts, we're not just picking random topics, we're trying to link it to something that they already know about. So, this is in the resource that if you scan the QR code at the beginning of the webinar, these are some of the resources. So here are some of the speakers that students encounter in this unit. These aren't the only ones. We also say to schools, you know, here's a list of speakers and here's a list of speeches that we look at, but feel free to add your own. We know that some schools have already added their own modern speakers added to that timeline, which is absolutely fine. But what we have tried to do is make sure that we have a range of diverse speakers. We don't just want it from men. We don't just want, you know, from white men especially. We want a range of women speakers and their female speakers of different genders perhaps. So lots of different speakers in there. And we do encourage schools and teachers to add any of their own as well in terms of speeches that will really connect and match the context of students at their school. So that's our timeline of speakers. Okay, I'm going to go back to the QR code in a minute, just in case anybody hasn't been able to scan the resource. But in a second, I'm just going to give you so once you scan the code, you'll be able to see the knowledge organizer. And all I'd like you to do is just to have a look at that knowledge organizer. And I just want you to highlight, or perhaps just note down, what are the main things that you think you'd want to draw your students' attention to? And what I'm just going to do is go back right to the beginning. So I'm just going to go back to slide 1. And sorry, I'm just going to go through it really quickly. I'm just going to give you a minute now to have a look at those resources. Sorry, I'm trying to find an easier way to go back to first slide. There we go. Okay. So you can scan that QR code again. If you arrived a little bit later and you weren't able to scan that QR code, that should take you to the resources, and that will take you to the knowledge organizer. So I'll leave that on there for you for a couple of minutes. And all I want you to do is just look at the knowledge organizer, and then in the chat feed, in the chat, just write down, share with us what you think is great that you would want to share with your students, or the most important knowledge you would want to pick out. Yeah, let me see if I can. I'm just going to stop sharing, if that's okay, and then I'll see just so I can grab the URL link. Just bear with me. Callum, unless Callum, you've got it at all. Okay, that's fine. Let me just stop sharing. I'll see if I can find the URL. Bear with me. Okay, let's see if I can put this in the chat feed. Oh, Jess, thank you so much for putting the link in. I've just put it in there again as well. Thank you for that. Let's see if I can share screen again. There we go. Okay, so when you're ready and you've had a look, if you could just put in, so Jess started us off, the triad, Aristotelian, I can never pronounce that right, triad. But yeah, if you could just put in the chat feed, what are the main things you'd want to draw attention to for your students? And I'll just give us 1 more minute just to share that. Also a chance for you to actually just skim through the knowledge organizer. Thank you, Gemma. Mastery checks. And Lynn actually also says mastery checks useful for clear success criteria. Brilliant. See if anyone else wants to share. Okay. So obviously that's for you to keep and have a look at. So this is just the knowledge organizer that we share with students. We do have a separate unit intent for teachers, but we just wanted to give you a kind of a taste of what students would have in terms of their knowledge organizer for this unit. So some of the key things are perhaps, we think really important in this unit. Yes, mastery checks are great, but actually the idea that not just teaching ethos, pathos and logos separately, but the skill of actually knowing that they have to work together to be effective. So for example, if we think about an emotional appeal or emotional language, sometimes students just try and put a bit of emotional language there, but actually what's important is that the emotion has to be a shared emotion. So it's a bit more complex than that, it's a bit more nuanced. How do you get your audience to share that emotion? It's not just trying to write, you know, a sentence that evokes emotion. How do you get a shared emotion? And secondly, obviously, rather than just a list of rhetorical language techniques, so not just AFOREST, really thinking about the impact of those language techniques or the features of effective orators. So we really think that's really important. Oh, so sorry the link isn't working. Let me see if I'll see if I can put another one in the chat again. If you just bear with me, I'll put it at the end and then you can access it so you can go away with the resources. Okay, so this is one of the tasks. So what this should come up in the link as well that you've highlighted, that you've scanned. This is one of the tasks that we look at in terms for the invention phase. If you remember, for the 5 steps, we talked about invention and how to come up with ideas. Now, for those of you who haven't taught Animal Farm or don't know the story well, we have a key character. So I'm just going to go back with me. Okay. So we have a key character who is a second in command. He is the Minister of Propaganda. He takes a central role in making announcements to the animals, and he's also very skilled at making speeches. In fact, a lot of the interaction that the animals have with this pig is him making a speech. I wonder if anyone does know Animal Farm, who this pig is. Does anyone know the name of this second in command, this pig in Animal Farm? We have a winner, Rebecca. Thank you. Yes, Squealer. So in Animal Farm, we look at this character in a lot of detail, and one of the tasks in the unit is we actually look back at one of Squealer's speech. So in this task, we say, well, let's remind ourselves of the emotions and ideas that Squealer tries to evoke, especially in this particular speech. So I'm going to get you to, I'll leave this on the screen, so if you weren't able to access it via the QR code, you can still see this on the screen, hopefully. I would like you just to put in the chat feed your response to that turn and talk task. How does a speech of Squealer make you feel as a reader? Now, feel free to answer this as an adult. It doesn't have to be, from the perspective of a student, but as you as an adult reading the speech, how does it make you feel? What emotions does this evoke in you? And I'll give everyone 2 minutes just to read that and to share your thoughts in the chat feed. Sarah, if you can't access the link, don't worry, you can just read it on the screen, and I'll try and put the link on the chat feed again in a second. Might just need to change the access. Okay, we've got, let me just scroll back and see some of the things we've got in the chat feed. So, patronize, thank you, Martha. We've got makes animals in the audience feel like what the pigs are doing is for the benefit of the others. Yes, makes them think and question their original thoughts. Greater good of this is all for the greater good of the group. Yeah, just want Jones back. We don't want the pigs anymore. Jones is much better, even though he was awful. He was much better. Perhaps some of you may have, some links to current government, perhaps, having parties during lockdown, etc., feeling manipulated, feeling lied to. Exactly. So some really great thoughts there in the chat feed. Yes, exactly. Feeling belittled if you were some of the animals. Perhaps you might feel that also Squealer is scaremongering, which again, a lot of us perhaps experience from the news and the media on a daily basis. So this is one of the tasks that we look at, is that we get them to think back. And this, again, it's not something new, because it's a unit that they have learned, that, they've done an assessment on this already, and they really know the characters well. Now, if you don't teach Animal Farm, obviously, that's something you might want to think about in your curriculum. If you do teach rhetoric, do you use or do you go back to content that you've taught before? So that it will remind students, oh no, actually, this isn't anything new. This is something that we've looked at before. So then they don't have to feel like they have to learn something new again from scratch. Actually, they can link back to, oh yes, this is how I felt. I remember that feeling. I remember how the animals felt when Squealer made this speech. And so what we do is we try to draw out the oral skills, building fluency and verbalization of the language. So this is, something that we would maybe get them to do, is to perhaps read out on speech on their own. I have seen this in classrooms when I've visited schools. Actually, they get students in pairs and they read it out to each other, and they add that intonation, and then they think about, well, how does Squealer's speech make you feel? But also, how does it link to ethos, logos, and pathos? So I'm actually going to get you to answer question 2, because we've already answered question 1. How does it make you feel? Now I'd like you to think about, how do you think Squealer's speech contributes to students' understanding of ethos, logos, and pathos? Because obviously that's a key principle in our unit in terms of how we teach rhetoric. So again, I'll just give everyone a minute. Maybe put down their answers in the chat feed. Okay, so feel free to share. How does Squealer's speech perhaps contribute to understanding of ethos, pathos, and logos? Either one of them or 3. Thank you, Jamie Lee, being first. Yes, absolutely. For logos, in Squealer's speech, he talks about science and health benefits. Thank you, Rebecca. Plays on the animal's emotions. So I'll just go down there for a sec. Making them feel guilty. Yes. Scared at the threat of Jones returning. Yeah, absolutely. You could use it for all 3. So again, it's another speech that's great to come back to when you are really focusing on each of those things, to draw those things out. So again, it's not getting them to think about, think of how would you put ethos, logos, and pathos in your speech? It's more thinking about, where have we seen that in play before? What was the impact of that? How did that make us feel when we were reading Animal Farm? So really getting them to think about impact. So thank you for those of you who put down your thoughts in the chat feed. So once we've really thought back and we've gone, linked back to prior learning, what we then do is we get students to then think about, okay, how is this going to be, how is this going to inspire you? So we get students to complete this task. So we've said that, Squealer's speech reminds us of how he lies, manipulates, and exploits the animals. When have you felt this? When have you felt manipulated? When have you felt like that somebody has lied to you? So think of that emotion, think of that time first of all, remind them of, how did you feel first of all? But then get them to start thinking about, okay, now let's put this into your own ideas. What do you feel strongly about? How have you felt social injustice, or perhaps when you felt a power imbalance? And that could be something between, perhaps them and their parents, or them and their teacher. But what would you speak out about? So it's really giving them the tools to think, oh yes, I've seen this before in something else that we've learned, but then getting them to connect to their own experiences, rather than just giving them a random topic about, I don't know, about social media is bad for you. Yes, it's a topic they connect to, but I think we've got to really model the steps in terms of, how do you get to that point, in terms of, how do you get to plan your ideas in terms of what your speech is about. So this is the next task that we would move on to. And then the next steps would be, we don't have time to go through all of the lessons, but then the next steps, after Invention, obviously, we'd then go through, spending some time really putting and their ideas together, then sharing some really explicit strategies on how to organise their writing, organise their ideas, and obviously going through the rest of those steps. So that's essentially what some of our resources look like. Obviously, if you're interested in seeing more of those resources or some of our other resources at English Mastery, you can go on to Art Curriculum Plus. If you search Art Curriculum Plus, we've also got some trial resources there as well. So you can see basically that, you know, we really thought carefully about the main challenges of teaching rhetoric, but how can we combat those challenges? How, you know, what's a fresh approach in terms of meeting those challenges and trying to really make it explicit to students how to plan and organise those ideas to have that impact on their reader and on their audience. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for your thoughts and ideas in the chat. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the English Mastery EF trial. So if you are interested, please do stay on. If not, then obviously you can feel free to go. This session is also being recorded. We will, I think we'll try and email the resource to you as well, but I'm going to try, what I'll do is I'll just try and put the link that I shared earlier here again. But also, if you do scroll up to the top, you can see the link as well on the chat feed. So I'm going to quickly talk about the EF trial. If you're staying with us, that's great. And basically, we are part of a second trial. So I talked about the trial that we joined in 2019, but we are, you know, I just wanted to talk to you really quickly if you are interested about it. So thank you to everyone who's saying goodbye, and hopefully you found that really useful. Thank you. So in terms of English Mastery, I mentioned earlier that we are a subject improvement programme, and essentially these are all the things that you get from us when you join our programme. So we give you a curriculum, progression and framework. We give you lesson guidance, resources. We give you one-to-one training and development, and we also give you really robust assessment materials. So we're not just a plug and play curriculum. We're not just resources that you can download off TES, for example. We are all of these things when you join the program. Adrian, so there is a criteria in terms of joining the trials. If you don't meet the criteria, then yes, obviously you can purchase resources. This is an example of our curriculum map. So you can see, again, if you go to Art Curriculum Plus, you can download, I think, a trial, or you can look at our curriculum map. But this is, we offer 3 strands. We offer literary heritage, or literature strand, a writing mastery, grammar strand, and also reading for pleasure. So the EF ran a trial in 2019, but obviously because of COVID, we weren't able to make a robust estimate of the impact of pupil progress. So we did have extensive interviews, but obviously we want the real hard data, and that's why the DfE decided to run the trial again. And that's the trial that you can be part of if you would like to be part of it. Just a quick sort of run through of how teachers felt English Mastery improved students' grammar skills, reading, writing, and overall progress. So we've got some really good numbers in terms of how they think it impacted students' progress in these areas. But actually, what has really come out from teachers is that they think that from year 7, the vocabulary that students learn and retain from the curriculum is great, and there's lots of sequencing, there's lots of retrieval, and also interleaving in our curriculum. So just some other stats there in terms of literary heritage. There's a difference between our literature and writing mastery strand. And actually, what's been really important from the trial is not just the curriculum itself, but also how we reduce teacher workload. So because we are a resource curriculum, because we have everything there, all teachers need to do is take those resources and plan and adapt it to their school context. And lots of teachers were satisfied with our training support, and also if they recommend it to another school. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm just gonna skip through these really quickly. So basically, the EF are funding a 2-year randomized controlled trial of English mastery. So if you were to go onto this trial, they would look at year 7 and year 8. So they would look at your year 7 starting in September, and they would look at the impact of that program on that cohort at the end of year 8. Now, the trial means that you get placed in 2 groups. So there's a randomization. So we get all of the schools if you do decide to join the trial, and you'll either get placed in the treatment group or what we call the control group. So after you've applied, the randomization takes place. You either get put into a control group or treatment group. If you're in the control group, it means really you don't get anything. It's just business as usual. We get no access to the English mastery resources. However, what you do get is, what you will have to do is submit your data throughout the 2 years, and you will receive a payment of 1,250 over the 2 years. So you'll still get payment, and you can use that payment how you wish on new books, you know, anything that you like for your department. If you're in the treatment group, you will get full access to the English mastery curriculum and in-person support. And then you will also have to implement the program in year 7, in the first year from September, and then year 8 in the second year. And you only have to pay £900. So you'll get the full program at a really reduced price of £900, and that's over the academic year. So eligibility is basically you just have to be an English state school, you have to be non-selective, you have to have a year 7 cohort in 2023 September and year 8 in 2024, and also you can't have delivered English mastery in the past. So you might have delivered it in the past and maybe not used it for a couple of years. If you have done that, then unfortunately you cannot be on this trial. And that's it. So if you think you are eligible and you'd like to, you know, either get 1,250 if you get put in the control school, or get the full program for reduced part of £900, then please feel free to contact us. You can also book a call by scanning the QR code here. So we've got a couple of questions here. So Adrian, I think I answered your question about if you can access resources if you're not joining the trial. Again, if you're not eligible in that criteria, then yes, there's a chance you can purchase it. Impact is, so we have actually independent evaluators. So we have Sheffield Hallam University, who are the independent evaluators. They collect data from the schools themselves. So we don't see the data at all. They will have created a test, and they basically they send that test to schools. They complete that, and then they gather the data that way. So we don't actually get involved in terms of the data collection. It's all through Sheffield Hallam University and the Education Endowment Foundation. So hopefully that answers your question. Future work with further education. I'm not sure, Martha. We at the moment we're just stuck with secondary at the moment, so we don't have any plans just yet. But we maybe, who knows? That'd be great. Okay, I think that is everything. If you do have any more questions, do feel free to put them in the chat feed. But if not, lovely to have you. Do have a look at our resources. Look on our website if you want more information about the EF trial, if you want to join. Like I said, you can scan this QR code to book a call as well. Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me.